So good then. I'm John Carley from Chasewater. This is Steve Leach. We've been very active in the NDP, we'll call it NDP process. We got started quite some time ago, started thinking about it way back in 2014, really. Went a bit quiet and then thought it was worth reinvigorating. As you can probably tell from the hippie hair and shaggy beard, I am that way inclined, if you know what I mean. Yeah, no, it's true. No, I try and hide it. So I've had a long and passionate interest in sustainability since my student days, which were back in the 60s, I think. I can't quite remember, but I think I was there. Thank you, Steve. I warned you about this. As part of the evolution of the NDP, which was strongly supported by our parish council, and we're members of our parish council, so it's not a them and us situation at all. A spin-off became the Chasewater Community Energy Group, which Steve and I and many other guys up there, and Peter, we've got Terry, Malcolm. We're hearing we don't like to come out from Chasewater by ourselves, for obvious reasons. Those who know Chasewater will understand why. Chasewater, as people know, I'm sure, is at the heart of the World Heritage Site for Cornish mining. That picture on the engine house on the left is our very famous shaft at Chasewater, indeed, and it's the tallest extant stack left in Cornwall, and it's very much a feature of our landscape and much loved. That is our wonderful front cover, designed by Ange, who spent a lot of time setting it out. And from the very early days, we took account of the climate emergency. We didn't call it the climate emergency back in 2016. We just said it was climate change. Now, there's a lot of words in this presentation, but I have printed out some paper copies, so don't worry if anyone would like any, we can certainly hand some out. They're here, I shall leave them at the front. So, starting off, our first meetings, as I said earlier, were back in 2014. It took us a little bit of time to get going to our initial 4-page questionnaire, our future, which was letterboxed to every single household, and basically came down to asking a single question: should we produce an NDP? We could have cut to the chase really, because we thought we were going to do it. However, we wanted to take it step by step. Good positive response, a fairly large number of replies came back, and I would say overwhelmingly it was decided that we should produce a plan. That was 2016. So we then had several public events through 2017. We set up the working groups, and we had a large number of local people involved in the process. Well over 20, they sort of settled down to about 20 active people. Quite a lot of the same people appearing in the same groups, obviously, as always happens in small villages. And we formulated an 86-point questionnaire through 2017, and copies of those questions have been provided to Charmian, so they will be available as part of your visitor pack, if you like. And it covered loads of aspects of life in our community. Well over 600 forms were hand-delivered to individual households. Every single household had at least one. We had, I think, about 1,000 printed. We've still got quite a lot left, actually, if you want any left. We worked quite hard on advertising in our local magazine, What's On in Chasewater. Quite a lot, actually, quite a lot on in Chasewater. And we had fairly good response back, and a number of 218 responses came back. And this wasn't something you could just glance through and tick and fill in 3 minutes. Really, it was about a dedicated 30, 40 minutes work going through in multi-choice questions. How do you feel about this? Tick 1 to 5 and so on. So it was easy to do, but you had to think about it, and there were 1 or 2 reverse trick questions, so we could make sure people had read it by the time they got through to question 72, and pleased to say people did. So in terms of percentages, it may not look very high, but it's not bad. We were told that if we got above 20%, we'd be doing all right, and we were above 20%, so we were happy with that. Vast amount of data from that. These are kind of the topics we covered. Biodiversity, flora and fauna, heritage, of course, very big in Chasewater. We have a vast number of listed buildings in Chasewater, well over 200 on our list. Very precious landscape. Then we asked a lot of questions about sustainability in carbon terms, renewable energy, touching on fuel poverty as well, the quality of design and location. You can probably read, can't you? Imagine you can all read. I won't read it out for you. Type tenure, jobs, transport. Obviously, many Cornish communities suffer with large amount of transport, people driving through. We have thousands of vehicles who drive through the Chasewater main street, and we have one of the sort of a hotspot of air pollution in Chasewater. Bizarrely, we're in the middle of nowhere, but we do get a lot of air pollution. Road safety, community health and well-being. Now, you dive in, Steve.
Okay.
Yeah. Can you? Oh yeah. Yes, there we are. Use the handheld mic.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. The questionnaire was split into several topics. Chances are that someone in that household will have an interest in at least one or more of the topics, and we want to hear their views. So we've recorded all those into a spreadsheet. One thing that we did after this was carry out a landscape assessment, and that's looking at our high areas, our low areas, photographs, descriptions, wildlife seen in the area, all that sort of thing. We also carried out a parish design statement, which gives anyone a flavour of what's in the parish, the type of buildings, types of use by farms, small industry. We have a few small industrial sites. We've also worked very closely with the Cornwall Wildlife Trust. So the maps that Dan was alluding to just now, Cornwall Wildlife Trust, for a fee, will provide you with really good wildlife corridors and things of your local area, just specific to your parish. We've also surveyed our businesses. They're very important to the parish, so we've carried out surveys for them, or on our behalf for them, and listening to their hurdles, if you like. And so many of them came back with they haven't got enough power. 3-phase is very difficult to get in Chasewater. Other restrictions, mobile phone reception in Chasewater, if any of you have driven through, is almost zilch. Broadband speeds also very poor. For some businesses, yeah, like I say, these are very important, including our health centre that rely on good mobile service and broadband speed. Things we learned from the questionnaire. Again, as Dan was saying, it's really important to get your questions right. How you load them, it's the same, you don't want ambiguous replies. You don't want to bore people either, so you've got to keep your questions pretty succinct. And like you say, we divided our questionnaire into 8 or 9 groups and just asked about probably 7 or 8 questions in each group.
Yes, around about that, yeah.
Yeah. So be very careful to be equal and inclusive across age groups, gender, beliefs, individual passions, individuals' needs, hard to reach groups, youngsters especially, very hard to reach. Use social media, or I think that's the word. Yeah. Like it or loathe it, it's here, take advantage of it.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Steve. Just looking at, is this microphone still on? Can you still hear me? Good. Okay. Looking at some detail about the renewable energy questions in particular, we asked a fairly general lead-in one. Happened to be our question 29, long way into the questionnaire by this time. Chasewater should aim to be, as far as possible, self-sufficient from renewable electricity generation. We have no gas actually not quite true. We have a little tiny bit of gas in odd places, but not in the main village. So heavily dependent on oil and bottled gas and electricity, of course. So we asked the question, should we aim to be energy self-sufficient? And not surprisingly, we got a good 88% people in favour. I'm always surprised, who were the 14 people who thought it's a bad idea? You think, sorry, there is no bloody planet B for God's sake. I'm sorry. I swear, it didn't go down terribly well, did it? Then we have the tricky one about wind turbines, because this is going back, these questions were formulated in 16, don't forget. So we asked the question about wind turbines, but we said we got an answer back 63% overall, agreed or strongly agreed. So 137 in total fell into that category, which is pretty really good. So we thought, even in Chasewater, even after setting the questions out in 16, we still got a clear majority in favour of wind turbines. And we didn't specify size, they could have been massive, but we didn't say, we just said wind turbines as a principle. Then we asked one about hydropower. We have a river in Chasewater, the River Carnan, not massive, but it is there. And people like the thought about that isn't actually a real turbine in Chasewater, which it was, but it isn't. A large number of people, 85% agreed, not many really disagreed. I think probably technical difficulties were the issues where people might have disagreed, because it's a fairly benign technology. We are still very keen as a group to press on and get something small. Terry and Peter, they have a slightly mad plan to overcome the licensing difficulties. They intend to build a very small turbine on a small catamaran and moor it in the river. Don't laugh, I think it's a bloody good idea. So they live by the river, I hasten to point out. So that's...
Not on the catamaran.
Not on the catamaran, they live in a house. So that was 31, 32. Solar farms, tricky one really, because you think solar farms not necessarily very popular, back against as many years ago now it seems. But nonetheless, we got 60% agreement, less than 37% disagreed. That is a solar farm I recognise very well, clearly. That's the factory that my wife and myself own. So that's not really a solar farm as such, but it is an example of roof-mounted solar in our parish. As an aside, there, it's pointing hopelessly at this thing, there are 6 little black panels sort of halfway up on the right-hand side. Those are solar thermal panels, and don't lose sight of solar thermal as an energy source, because it is very valuable. We get around about 8 kilowatt hours a day of energy from each of those banks of 3, so 16 total, half of which goes to the factory, half of which goes to a flat. So it's certainly possible to do. Last year, 2018, as a proper industrial unit, and we burn a lot of electricity, we burnt our way through 45 megawatt hours of energy in the year, manufacturing wonderful range of organic nut butters available at many local retailers. Not cynical laughter. But we generated 46 megawatt hours of electricity from our, so we were just in grid surplus by the time we got to December 31st. So we were very pleased. As I mentioned, the flat of our factory, when we built the factory, we were allowed by the planners to put in a 3-bedroom flat, and we wanted to build it to the same very high standard, so extremely thick insulation and triple glazed windows and its own little tiny PV system, battery storage, and the couple who rent the flat from us run their home, all of their mains water, mains electricity and their heat comes to £7 a week. So they're very pleased. And making use of rainwater harvesting, so so the loos flush with rainwater, the laundry thing washes with it. So, oh, sorry.
Just staying on that slide, recently we visited over in France and were surprised by the number of estate agents who were selling new houses on very small developments. And just for instance, a new 2-bedroom house, super insulated, all electric heating, all from renewables, from €160,000 for a new house. They are subsidised by the French. Sellers claim that they can run these properties on average €30 a month for electric costs. If they can do it, we can.
Yeah. It's really an issue of sort of designing out fuel poverty, and it's obviously much easier to do with a new build than try to retrofit, but nonetheless it is possible to do, and economically possible to do. That's the key thing. So we're pleased with that. Moving on now to the actual policies, I'll hand back to Steve for these policies.
Through those, I think, can't we?
Okay.
They're all to do with.
These are we have 6 policies, RE1 called RE, Renewable Energy 1 to 6, and we actually have them in there. So that's the wind turbine one. These are shown in slightly more detail in the handout, so please help yourself to those at the end. Solar, roof mounted and ground mounted, both supported.
So just to add to the wind farms, we have had a map of the parish produced. That's produced by CEP or
CEP,
Community Energy Plus, for any of those that might not know. They provided us with a map of suitable locations for wind farms or wind turbines across the parish. We're in a World Heritage Site. There are limited places for these, and with other restrictions, CP applied to the map, very few places. However, even in that, there are the odd couple of areas where wind turbine would be very useful.
In particular, we have an industrial estate called Hammond Beagle, the so-called energy park, which is highly suited because there you've got an end user right there on site, and it's also high up, and the wonderful old engine houses all been knocked down now, which is appalling, apart from one. So we are very keen to see wind energy built there if we can reach agreement. Mentioned solar, micro hydro. Obviously, this doesn't mention the Willow Bridge floating catamaran, but we are nonetheless very keen to do it. We are the site of the runoff from the A30, and Highways England have a plan to stop flooding our village by means of installing a catchment lake, very large, very large pond, small lake, adjacent to the A30. And the idea, what we would love to see, is from that, use that as a head to generate, to have some sort of hydro scheme. We heard earlier about the importance of talking to landowners. There is a landowner you may have heard of called the Tregothnan Estate in Northampton. Oh, you have? Yeah. Well, we have regular discussions with Tregothnan because we obviously need to, and they are broadly supportive of the idea of making use of the river for a trial microhydro scheme. So we are enthusiastic of getting that coming forward. 6 is low carbon heat. Always worth putting in, very important with certainly certain settlements. When you're having any sort of larger development coming forward, you need to be aware that it is possible to put in some sort of heat main and centrally generating the heat, even on a small scale. And we have to be very careful, very aware of the fact that any of these things, wind, ground-mounted PV, even a heat main like that, you need to be cautious of the fact that if you identify sites, there's a danger that you're going to add hope value to the land value. If it ceases to be agricultural land, but is then perceived by the landowner to become development land, there's hope value added to it. But the broader benefit may outweigh that particular disadvantage. Very heavily supported by survey respondents that we should have that. Now then, all of that data and more, much more, can be downloaded direct from the chasewater.net website. So some of the details of the presentation, which is only a real snapshot, are available here as a printout. So it's very easy to do. You can download the whole deposit draft neighbourhood plan as a PDF, and we're always very keen to talk to people about. There we are, this man there with a printed copy. It does actually exist in real life. There we are, not the man. I mean, he obviously does. You probably knew that. So we have a few printed handouts available. That's what we've done thus far. It was led, the whole scheme, we had a champion who's not here today, can't be with us today, Rob Nill, who's sort of kind of Mr. Chasewater NDP. He is the sun around which the minor planets orbit. But he's been a really absolutely stalwart servant for the community. And this is his slide. So this is what we've done so far. We believe it to be most important. We didn't just enter into the public discussions and consultations as something we've got to go through, we don't really want to do it. We really did go out and talk to people, took time, advertised them very, very well, went to, obviously not just the one village hall in the middle of Chasewater, but the other outlying, even down to 12 heads on 2 occasions. I counted them all out, I counted them all back in again, we all got home. So we talked to people, and actually people in the community really value that, because when we got, in terms of the numbers of people coming through the door, compared to the size of that little community, going out to 12 heads, going out to Blackwater was more, we got a higher uptake, if you like, than just simply sitting there in the village hall saying, we're having another discussion day. We had several discussion days. We believe the community is the key driver towards achieving collective renewable energy, and it really is, because no one's going to do it for us, and it's too important to leave it to others. What can we do to help? We want to ask ourselves and everyone really. The people say, oh, it's going to be really, really expensive to sort out climate change. Well, just think about the cost of not sorting out climate change.
Just to add to that, you know, with the consultations, we also want to set a good example in Chasewater. So we are currently in discussion with Cornwall Housing to improve the energy efficiency, insulation, etc. of one of our ex-sheltered housing schemes, which is now a supported housing scheme. And we believe that if we can get Cornwall Housing on board, get some money spent and bringing that one up to a good standard, that should be a beacon for the rest of them. So we say about, you know, what else can we do? And just one idea, what's come out today with some of the ideas going around the room, perhaps we ought to look at the new developments, scrap CIL, and get the developers to use that money to put in renewables, PV and heat pumps into the little houses that they're building.
Definitely. You never know your luck, you never know. Something else, let's go. I'm going, here we are. You can think about installing one of these new 4-in-1 fully automatic planet-saving devices, which are solar powered. They are amazing things. We're here all week.
There'd be a whole forest.
Absolutely. So that's us, Chasewater Energy Group. As part of the consultation thing, we've organised talks. We've had a renewable energy fair last year, an electric vehicle day. We just basically looked at what Stithian's energy group was doing. We just copied all their ideas because they're way ahead of us. We helped produce Chasewater Parish Council's Sustainable Energy Advice leaflet, and we have a few copies of that available as well in one of the rooms over there, which is basically pretty much, you've seen this graph before about temperature, and it talks about the Paris and, well, we call it the Paris and Scallops Climate Change Agreement. Scallops is code for Chasewater, and basically saying, you know, 1.5 is going to be awful, so let's try and be better than 1.5. And we just look, all of these pictures are taken of things that are actually in Chasewater. So low of installations so far, small domestic wind turbine, lots of battery storage, lots and lots and lots of PV. So we'll talk about that. Kind of says it all, really. Miraz.
Right, thank you very much. Back on again. Great, yeah, so if you mind staying around and do some questions, yourself and to Dan, how we're going to manage. Pass that around and then have one to run around to the audience. Okay, start off up this way, perhaps we can pass the microphones along, we'll come back up this way.
We've had lots of very good ideas put forward today, and lots of us would love to implement them. But where is the money going to come from for a lot of these schemes? Could the people who've taken part today put together lists of organisations and charities where one might apply for help or finance?
In terms of the NDP process, there is funding available. I think.
I'm talking about implementation. We've done our neighbourhood
right,
plan,
fine, okay.
and unfortunately we did it before Cornwall Council did.
Yeah.
And you are encouraging people to be adventurous in what they're doing in their neighbourhood plan, but it does have to comply roughly with Cornwall Council's plan. Otherwise, like we found out, we had some very inventive housing against second homes, to restrict second homes, and we've not been able to implement them because it doesn't comply with Cornwall Council's plan. So you have to be a little bit cautious about, you know, being too adventurous because it will get turned down.
No, don't be cautious.
No, exactly.
Yeah,
I think St Ives just had a similar problem, and I think they've addressed theirs through their neighbourhood development plan.
It's not impossible.
No.
I mean, obviously there is funding available through locality to support you developing your neighbourhood plan, and I think a lot of it's about producing a sufficient evidence base to actually back up your policies in the first place and when they're needed. and viable and feasible. Okay, sorry. I think in terms of kind of renewable energy schemes and kind of community energy schemes, we see lots of kind of share issues happen all the time. And so, you know, you'll have a kind of community energy project, they'll issue a share issue, people will invest over kind of the medium term and get a reasonable rate of return on that, and then you raise the capital expenditure to actually fund your project. That's the model that's been approached so far.
Thank you.
In fact, we've just had a visit from a couple of Cornwall Council officers this week who are saying that there is a lot of money available for new businesses and new incentives, especially anything around renewable energy.
You're going to say that we're very happy to sort of circulate any suggestions, so if people want to feed in ideas, we have some ourselves, but there might be new pathways and other activities, and we'd be happy to share that with the groups attending today.
Just to touch on that money bit, you can also use SIPs and SAS, self-invested pensions, as an idea that we can potentially talk about later. In particular though, my question is, because I'm from the other end of the country up in Newcastle, and it's fantastic to see what's going on here, is there a national neighbourhood development association? No.
I don't think there is.
Well, if there was, they wouldn't let us join. I don't know. Cornish humour.
Yeah, my question's for Dan. You mentioned Planning and Energy Act 2008 predating the existence of the NCP. Can you highlight some of the implications of this towards parish and town councils?
Yeah, I mean, basically, the kind of what happened is that the government nationally was going to bring in a zero carbon homes policy regime back in 2015, and then it cancelled that very shortly before it was going to happen. And so you had the Planning and Energy Act 2008 that enabled local planning authorities to kind of set binding standards for energy performance standards, and that was going to be pulled, that power was going to be pulled from local authorities because there was going to be this national scheme that would come in place in its stead. And so there's been great confusion for a number of years as to, well, is that in, is it out, is it possible to do that or not? And we had clarification last year that local planning authorities could impose binding energy performance standards for new development. And so, you know, London, all London authorities have binding standards requiring zero carbon housing, basically. And we're supporting the authorities around us, around Bristol, to do the same, basically. But that piece of legislation from 2008 predates the Localism Act, which was 2012, I think, where neighbourhood planning became a thing. And so it doesn't mention it. And so I don't think that neighbourhood plans, I'm doubtful whether they have the powers to actually embed those sorts of binding policies and standards.
Say they can't do it. That's the key thing.
Well, I'm just giving you my opinion.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that you shouldn't try, and I know I'm aware of a couple of groups that are doing it, but you know, we've been doing some work with the four authorities around us, and just the requirements of producing evidence to demonstrate that those standards are going to be feasible, and more to the point that development will still be economically viable. It's very challenging, and very challenging for local planning authorities to do, never mind neighbourhood planning groups. So all I'm saying is that if your local planning authority is doing that, you don't need to step into the breach, because it's a very difficult, complicated area to get into. I'm not saying you should have a go if you want to.
Dan, can you comment on supplementary planning documents and their role in that?
Supplementary planning. So basically, what supplementary planning documents do, you have a planning policy in your local plan, and many authorities will adopt a piece of supplementary planning document, a supplementary planning document, which will sort of provide greater interpretation and detail about how a particular policy would be applied, basically. But there aren't the powers for a neighbourhood plan to actually have a supplementary planning document.
Your county, your unitary authority can.
Your council can. Yeah.
This question here.
As a Cornwall councillor, I'm interested to see what we can do about this. So the two things I'm keen to avoid is one, leaving ourselves open to complaints that we haven't thought things through. So we would love to, some of us would love to put in plans that say all housing has to be zero carbon, but then we're told, you know, I'm concerned that someone's going to come along and say, well, look, what that's going to mean is that housing becomes totally unaffordable in Cornwall, business moves, you know, you're just exporting the pollution over the border to England. The other bit of the unintended consequences is, have we thought through fully, everybody's talked about the carbon footprint of living in a house, but nobody's mentioned the carbon footprint of building the house. And is there any scope for saying, you know, whether you build a house out of concrete or wood could make a big difference, and what power do we have on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think it's an area that's been sort of neglected, actually, for quite a long time. Because, you know, I've sort of seen documents about how we use our wood resources, and, you know, using them, burning wood as biomass is actually crazy, and we should be using wood to build houses and sort of sequester carbon away. And I don't see why you shouldn't include policies that sort of, you know, touch on the kind of embodied energy and embodied emissions within building. You know, many councils have those sorts of policies.
And just on that though, I was talking to a timber merchant the other day who was saying that the British standard for the type of wood you're allowed to use in building the frame of a timber house has to be Scandinavian because it's slow growing and more dense. So, you know, we need to make sure we look at the whole picture and we don't dive into things that are half-cocked.
But suffice to say, I know that Cornwall Council, I know that you are, the officers at least, are thinking about whether you can have binding energy performance standards. I don't know how far they've got down that road, but I sent through the reports that we've done for the 4 West of England authorities to those officers, so they are aware of it.
So the microphone's just right here.
Yeah, hi, my name's Roz. I wanted to say thank you to everyone, to all the speakers and to everyone in the room. Just recognise how much like care and love and experience there is here. And then a question for all the speakers, really. Charmian made sort of brief mention of reducing the amount of stuff we think we need, and of reducing demand, and there's a lot of talk of really amazing technological solutions, and it seems to me it's also more stuff, and I see the place for that. I'm just wondering what thoughts you all have on how we can empower communities to embed less stuff. We can't have everything we want all the time like that.
Well, I agree. I'm very much an anti-stuff person. Actually, I think my socks are probably older than you. Actually. Thank you very much. I do watch them, you know. But I think it's so true. I think it's very easy to say, oh, let's generate another so many kilowatt hours, whatever, for the year. But if the amount of energy involved in putting that thing in is disproportionately high, then you've got to be wary of that. However, having said that, I am assured by those people who install PV panels, etc., that actually the carbon cost of them is really desperately low, and they repay that carbon debt within a matter of a few months. So you know, there is going to be a benefit, I'm sure, in the long term.
I was just going to add, really, that I see the kind of neighbourhood plan as being one tool in your armoury, really. And what you quite often see is that you'll do a consultation process on a neighbourhood plan, and people will raise lots of issues and policies that you can have as actual planning policies. And then a load of other wonderful stuff over here that's not a planning policy, but could be a project for your community to sort of enact. And so I'd say don't throw that stuff away, that's gold, actually. And, you know, get those projects running. I think there's great opportunities from like sort of co-housing, so not everybody has to have a spare room and tool libraries.
I was just going to say something about co-housing, because I'm in the co-housing community in North Cornwall, and I did a carbon footprint on it about 5 years ago. And the key thing was the stuff, because not everybody needs washing machines, not everybody needs ladders, not everybody needs lawnmowers. So in fact, promoting co-housing as an affordable housing option, which it can be, actually is a good way forward of reducing stuff as well.
Thanks for your very amusing talk. I just want to add something there about sharing resources. You know, why don't we think about using our libraries for lending out lawn mowers, pressure washers, this kind of stuff? In fact, people are reading less and less books, so let's use the space for this stuff that we need to share more of. But my point was more about energy and resource conservation. And there's been an awful lot of talk about energy generation, which is all good. But we know that all the products that we buy now come from a globalised market and travel ridiculous distances to get to the retailers. We use them for 5 minutes and throw them away in a lot of cases. So I think I'd like to hear what your views about where waste management sits in your agenda for your local community. I'd like to see Cornwall Council thinking very soon about collecting food waste, because at the moment it's being transported to an incinerator.
There's a response that we are.
And it is creating methane that we could be capturing, etc., etc. I think also at the amenity sites, we've seen people throwing perfectly good things in big containers to be sent to the incinerator. I know that there's a shipping container at the one near Longdowns where they extract the good stuff to resell it. We need to be doing more of this and preventing stuff going to be burned when it's perfectly good to be repaired and reused. You know, these are kind of hidden factors in this big scheme. Okay, so if I could hear what you've got to say about energy and resource conservation.
The new waste contract, unfortunately contracts have got a number of years that they run, and changing them midway is difficult, but the new waste contract will start in 2020, and collecting food waste separately on a weekly basis along with recycling on a weekly basis is part of what we're talking with the bidders for the contract. So food waste coming out of black bags, even better, is not wasting food, I would say, but there we are. And in terms of reuse, we are looking more and more at reuse facilities, and are going to get that mainstream. But again, that's where communities can step in, and I think more and more communities are having sort of these cafes where people come together with skills and mend stuff. And I know in my own community, I'm slightly worried about the sexism bit of it. They're having a men's shed or something. They do assure me women will be allowed to go to it. So I think these are all things that, you know, we are moving forward on, and hopefully people will see changes coming.
Hello. Oh, hello. Is this on? Oh, yeah, it is on. Yeah. I've got a question, and I don't think it's a question. One's about housing, one's about neighbourhood plans, or one's about energy in neighbourhood plans, onshore wind. So the one about, I'll do the housing one first. I've seen in some draft neighbourhood plans the thing about, you know, housing have to be BREEAM or passive house or code for sustainable homes or what have you. But I wondered if there should also be the fourth option, and it's that whole kind of like embedded energy versus energy use thing. Because in a way, I mean, some guys, a friend of mine, Bill, is a ecological consultant, and he was involved in the work in Wales for the One Planet Living thing, which is the thing that allows them to have low impact dwellings over there. So they're kind of almost like the opposite of a passive house. So that you know, like your passive house has got you spend a lot of energy there making it, and then it uses bugger all going forward. Whereas your low impact dwelling is the other end, you know, where you use virtually nothing, and you can compost the house when you leave it, kind of thing. But you probably do have to put some wood in your wood burner. So I don't know if many. So that question to do with housing is if there are any neighbourhood plans that have included that option, like the One Planet Living low impact option. And then my question to do with energy is, and the reason I ask is because we were involved, we were consulted, and it fed into what was the supplementary planning document. In Cornwall, it became the Renewable Energy Planning Guidance, and they interpret Chapter 10, Paragraph 97 of the National Policy Planning Framework to do with community-led stuff. We've yet to see that actually used or work.
So the policy's there, but we've yet to see it actually work. And I kind of wondered in terms of neighbourhood plans, like how many neighbourhood plans there are now that have actually been signed off, how many of them have actually specified stuff to do with onshore wind, and whether there is any onshore wind actually made in any of those places yet.
I'm going to forget your first question in a minute. As to the question as to whether I've seen any policies with low embodied energy policies, I haven't seen any, but I don't see why you shouldn't include them. I mean, I think there's great scope to include sort of policies encouraging innovative low carbon design. I think I've put in a suggested wording within our guidebook.
They've done it in Wales.
Yeah, yeah. And then the question is community energy projects and the kind of the preferential support given for those projects.
I'm asking for any onshore wind in neighbourhood plans.
All right. I mean, the first one I've seen is here actually, Gwynedd William Neighbourhood Plan, which includes a policy for onshore wind and identifying suitable areas. I think that's the only one I've seen that's actually made it through to adoption so far. But we're supporting a couple of groups that are considering it. And obviously I've produced some guidance about how you do that as a neighbourhood plan.
Without feed-in tariff, they can't afford to build anything, can they?
Well, I don't know, because the economics are changing so fast, and the costs are coming down so quickly. I don't know whether that's going to be a problem in the medium term. I'm not sure. I'm not an expert on that.
Hi. Just to build on some points, I think somebody already mentioned other things like waste that we hadn't really heard a lot about. We had an answer from Sue, they're going to start collecting food waste, but I wonder if any others have already built into their neighbourhood plans things around community composting and community anaerobic digestion, and perhaps Sue could answer, once they collect the food waste, what are they actually going to be doing with it?
Initially, it will go to, there's enough capacity in terms of anaerobic digestion, is what we found, that initially we'll be able to use existing capacity. So we're not at the moment talking about building our own anaerobic digester. So there's enough capacity around or coming online that we reckon that when we start off, that there'll be enough capacity around. The research suggests there is.
Following on from what Sue Gaines has just said, I've been involved in anaerobic digestion for 5 years, and most of the supermarkets, most of the hotels, outlets where there's large amounts of food waste, and they are now getting pretty good. We did have problems in the early days because they thought they could chuck the beer bottles in, they could chuck anything in, and we had the job to educate that food waste is a source of energy, and it's a very good source of energy. Now, the only downside on it with food waste, where I've been involved, Sue's starting off doing now to do food waste eventually around this area, but it's the volume. And for an anaerobic digestion plant to work, you need volume. So it's all down to volume. It's no good saying, oh, we can collect it and put it in an anaerobic digester. You can make an anaerobic digester out of a tent, but it's economics and it's volume. So it was originally making gas. The gas was working by driving an engine. The engine drove the generator. Now that's advanced on, and now the gas is they're trying now to purify the gas more so that the gas is used within the domestic system, and a lot of plants are doing that. Thank you.
Yeah, Stephen Reynolds from Haymore, near Penzance. I have a broader question. We've had a lot about energy, a lot about climate change, nothing yet about what is driving a lot of that, which is population growth. Now, I realise that in this county, we can't control the world's population. We can have some influence over the population of this county. A lot of the energy consumption that is going to increase in our county over the period of the lifetime of these neighbourhood plans is potentially from inward migration. Cornwall Council have very aggressive housing targets, partly at the dictate of the government, partly at the dictate of government inspectors enforcing a second homes quota on the local authority. The problem that we face in our community is that we are having potentially 640 houses imposed on a village of 1,200 houses. It would be lovely to have policies that would enhance biodiversity, but I fail to see how we can write a policy into our neighbourhood plan to enhance biodiversity on greenfield sites that are being concreted over. So I think that we need to look again at how we manage the population of our county going forward, so that we can sustain what we've got. Because if we continue to increase the population of this county at the rate it has been increased, which is faster than most local authorities over the last 10, 15 years, we won't even be able to keep pace with the demand for energy, however much we invest in renewables. So I think that's something that needs to be addressed at the council policy level. We can't do a lot about it in our neighbourhood plans because we're prisoners of the local plan strategic policies. But I think it's a message we need to put across generally. So that's something we need to think about.
I think focus with a question here and then yourself. Come around and then come around this way. Sorry, I was trying to. Is that right?
Thank you very much. It's been a wonderful presentation from you guys this afternoon. Just one question. Legislation for neighbourhood development plans was brought in 2012. We're now in 2019. In that time, as far as we know, we haven't had one wind turbine put up. How do we speed up this process? Through questionnaires, public consultation. The average NDP time is what, 3 years? Yep. How do we speed this up? Because we've only got 12. 11. Sorry.
I think my response would be that the government has sort of essentially cut the onshore wind industry off at the knees through the kind of policy regime that they've applied, and it makes it very difficult for local planning authorities and neighbourhood planning groups to actually put the evidence in place in order to get policies through. And as you know, the timescales for doing it are very slow. And so I kind of think that the sort of government is behind public opinion on onshore wind. You know, you look at even their stats, it's 75–80% in support of onshore wind. Even a similar percentage of approval, even when you ask the question, would you support a large-scale, renewable energy project in your neighbourhood? Still a very high percentage of support. So I do think that bit of guidance and legislation needs to be changed, really. Now, what's in my mind is a question as to how we should change it. In the reason that the government was able to put in this ban on effectively the cheapest form of energy there is because at the time it came in, I think onshore wind had quite a bad reputation, and you had schemes that was essentially being parachuted in and being imposed on communities. And so there's a question in my mind as to whether it would be the right approach to actually just remove that whole requirement to plan ahead for wind and just let it go back to the days of you could just slap in the planning application. Would we go back to the days of kind of communities being oppositional to wind? Would that happen? And therefore, should we just, instead of just totally cancelling the current planning regime for wind, should we just try and make it easier for communities, for those projects to come forward with support? I know it's an open question in my mind.
I live near the vicinity of a solar farm, and I've got some wind turbines in my area as well. And they're all fine and dandy whilst they're bright, shiny and new. But after a period of time, they start to deteriorate, which means the solar farms start actually producing a lot of sort of quite audible noises. Now, at my age, I can still hear them. And it is becoming quite deafening. So are there processes with the planning permissions that are going in for this to ensure that as if a turbine starts to fail and starts generating excessive noise, or solar farms start to deteriorate and again start producing excessive noise, is there a structure in place to ensure that these things are looked at and repaired quite rapidly? And the second part of my question is, I love the pictures with the sheep underneath the solar panels and stuff. I think I've seen it once in all my travels in real life. And the farmers and people who own the land are also asked to maintain it in a ecological and friendly way. I barely ever see anything not cut back to an inch of its life. So these things are sold as it's going to be lovely and green, it's going to encourage things. In reality, actually, we don't want anything that's going to cause any issues regarding the amount of sunshine that's going to get to our panels, and we're going to cut the hedges back. So we're being sold one thing, and as a person who lives in one of these communities, I got one of these things, all for green energy, but actually let the developers and the planning and the council, they've got a responsibility to ensure those who are living around these things are not adversely affected by it. What's in place to help the residents of these areas?
Well, obviously, I'm slightly worried to hear about sound from PV panels. I know I haven't come across that particular issue before.
You're more than welcome to come.
No, I'm not just doubting for a moment, because obviously anything that's stationary and moving airstream, you're going to get some deflection of the air, and that can cause the noise, I'm sure, in the end. Is it a sort of a buzz from the electronics, or?
Yes, it is.
Right. Well, the Environmental Protection Act provides a route. If it does become a statutory nuisance, it has to be put right. I mean, there's no two ways about it. So Cornwall Council's Environmental Health Department will be able to take action if it's identified to them. If it's a nuisance, they will go and measure the noise and take steps accordingly, because someone will own it, and you can't cause a nuisance to your neighbour.
On the sort of onshore wind turbines, I can see that those are issues and legitimate concerns. That when you have a planning application for a wind farm or wind turbine, there's obviously quite a detailed noise report come in that will predict the kind of predicted noise output from the turbine, and then model what the noise will be received at the nearest dwellings. And so I think it's worth looking at whether there's any planning conditions on the consent for that wind farm that actually put those in sort of enforce those, basically. So, you know, if the noise levels at your property are higher than they were predicted to be, you know, is there something that the council can do about that through that planning condition?
Just to say, I was on the planning committee, and there was always a condition about noise and from turbines, and increasingly from the glare and noise of the solar panels, where they get to the electronics, the hum from the transformers. So that is there, and the first thing is to, as has been said, report it to the council enforcement, who will then look into it for you. But it shouldn't be a problem, and it can be managed.
I think, yeah, the solar farm developers had a lot of lessons learned. The early ones that were deployed were too low to the ground, and the sheep, they might have intended to graze, and then they couldn't because the cables were too vulnerable. And they've learned that lesson. They're mounting them higher, protecting the cables going through. Similarly, the noise from the inverters was not thought of as an issue, not understood initially, but it's much more recognised now. So new developments wouldn't have either of those issues in theory.
The majority of the day, quite naturally, has been on mitigation for climate change. But I wonder if we ought to be considering a few more adaptation issues in the neighbourhood development plans, such as health or issues like this, which could be very severe if we actually get into these changes that we're expecting.
Yeah, yes, definitely. I mean, I'd say that kind of those sorts of policies, they're really, the local planning authority should be doing that. And like, if they're not, then definitely do it. And one particular area of vulnerability, obviously, there's been lots about flooding and avoiding flood risk, but actually heat and vulnerability to kind of heat stress is a potentially huge issue that we haven't really addressed properly so far in planning policies that are already in place. And the kind of last iteration of national planning policy talked about that. So you've got the sort of backing to put those sorts of policies in place. Now, quite how you do that, I think we're early in the process of how you set that out.
I'm afraid, time-wise, we're going to have one last question here, and then we'll have a short break before we have the workshops.
Madam Mayor, please.
Right, there's been a few times when second homes were mentioned, and it's a lot of it. There's been also a lot of mention of building new houses,
Now, I've heard some figures that if all these second homes were actually used for housing people who actually need somewhere to live and haven't got anywhere, then we wouldn't actually need to build any more new houses. So that would be so much, that would be so much more environmental. That would save a lot of carbon emissions and so on, save a lot of resources and stuff and everything. And I think there should be, I mean, it's not going to happen because the powers that be, it's all based on money and capitalism and so on. But if there were laws that stopped people having more than one home, then there'd be enough to go around, and the environment would benefit. And
can we stop calling them second homes? It's second houses to go on holiday to.
Yeah.
And a person only needs one home.
Yeah.
And I think that's the first thing we need to start with. And I don't regret people. I want people to come and have a holiday in Cornwall, but they don't need a house that stays empty for 90% of the year.
So I'm sorry. So time-wise, we're going to divide up, give you a quick break before we meet up for the workshops going forward. So we've got some rooms allocated. The seminar rooms have got labels on the doors. So the climate-friendly NDP will be in workshop in room L and possibly room C if we're not combining. Dan in room L, Mark in room C. Working with Cornwall Council will be in seminar room D. NDP policies for zero carbon buildings in G. Persuading your parish to adopt climate resilience in K.
And we got cake with that one.
Land allocation for energy use in I. Mapping for climate change in F. Questions to the community in your NDP process will stay in here. Flood and coastal management in J. And community energy groups and the NDP process in H.